Dave, I got to tell you, we had a wonderful weekend here in the Guigar household. Our younger son, Max, had been away for about 2 weeks on a trip with the Keystone State Boy Choir, where they visited Portugal and Morocco. They had a great time. And they saw all kinds of stuff. They were in Casablanca. They ate at Rick's Cafe. They did a bunch of performances, and of course, just enjoyed being in Portugal. And it was really interesting because the reason you want your kids to have these adventures is because it very often changes them in kind of a good way.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And I'll tell you what I mean by that. My son, Max, very much like his father, was a little bit of a picky eater. Still is. And frankly, so am I. We're both a little bit picky. I won't touch anything with mayonnaise in it, for example. I don't like any of that. And he had a lot of the same issues, and we were kind of joking, like he better be able to find chicken fingers and fries, while he's in Portugal.
If there's one thing Portugal's famous for, is chicken fingers and fries.
It's the Portuguese chicken fingers.
That's right.
But he comes back, and we're so happy to have him back, because 2 weeks is a long time to be out of touch with your kid. And one of the rules is you can't send cell phones or anything with the kids, because they found out just through doing this so many times that they don't really have trouble with homesickness until mom or dad call up on the phone, and then the kid hears the worry in the parent's voice, and then they get worried, and then all of a sudden they're homesick, and now they've got a kid, that they got to deal with. So they're like, listen, this works out best if there's just, you let your kid have an adventure. And I'm a real big believer in this. Let them go out and stand on their own 2 feet. And, if something happens, Alex, on one of these trips, Alex is a member of the same choir. My older son fainted during a performance, hit the back of his head, and they needed stitches. Right?
Oh, geez.
And so we heard about it after they were getting stitched up. And it's like, well, are they okay? Yeah, Alex is fine. Great. Let us know when it's time to pick him up at the airport, So Max comes back, and Max is telling us all the stories. And Max goes, oh my God. And the food over there was fantastic. And, my wife's driving the car, almost, drives it off the road. She says, the food? He says, I had the cod. It was amazing. And then they had this beef stew. We're looking at him. Stew? You don't eat stew? Stew has food that's touching. You don't eat stew? The stew was amazing. And it had these little things, these round things. You've talked about them before, Mom. Little round things that you'd use in Moroccan food. We're like, couscous? No, bigger than a couscous. Carolyn goes, chickpeas? He goes, amazing chickpeas. She says, do you know how long I've been wanting to make food for the family that had chickpeas in it? He says, it was so... He's got all this food now that he wants to try, that he wants Carolyn to try.
How wonderful.
I think he tried butternut squash soup. I won't even touch that shit. And he's like, no, it was great. The soup was amazing. I think it was a combination of peer pressure, getting really, really honestly hungry, and being in a situation where you had to try things, and just not having a bunch of people around you that was kind of like, well, Max is the picky eater, so we'll just do this and that. And he had a chance to try on a new version of himself. And he found out that it fit real well.
That's great.
And so he came back wanting to try all this new food, and my wife, who's a real wonderful cook, is over the moon about it.
That is wonderful. I love the idea that it's also don't discount old-fashioned starvation as like the first day he's a picky eater, and then day 2 he's like, well, I guess I'm eating caldo verde. I've never had it before, but I guess this is what's on the dish. But I love the idea that he would get back off the plane from Portugal. Like, I'm imagining all white suit, no socks with some dress shoes, right? The scarf, and he's like, mother, you must try the piri piri. You're going to love it. It's fantastic.
Smoking a little cigarette that he's holding backwards.
I'm so glad to be home from Portugal. I want to introduce you to the chickpea. Also, I got to tell you glossed over it at the beginning of the story, but what was the name? Keystone State Boys Choir?
Yes, yes.
That is the most 1950s Abbott and Costello like setup for a joke. Like Keystone State Boys Choir. Like that's such a specific Keystone State Boys Choir is such a ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba joke phrase. Like that's interesting in the phraseology of it.
To it. Yeah. Yeah, they've been performing with that group for a long time, and partially this is why they wanted to get involved, because there's a lot of travel opportunities. Alex one year spent New Year's Eve in Red Square in Moscow, and actually found themselves on the wrong side. They wandered around. They found themselves on the wrong side of the barrier and tried to get back in, and were met with guns. And then they had him and my son Alex and another kid had to figure out on the fly how to get in touch with the group leaders inside Red Square to say, hey, we're out here on the wrong side of the fence, come and get us, and had to negotiate with a stranger in Russian the use of their phones so that they could use Facebook to communicate through Messenger with this group manager.
And that's the day that your son learned about bribing a Russian guard to get past him.
That's right. That's right.
Sure would be a shame if these 300 rubles fell somewhere where they couldn't be picked up.
and if we happened to sneak through while you were picking them up. Yeah,
exactly. And on that note, I want to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, the author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. We have a whole show of culinary delights for everyone. But first, I want to remind you that you could be watching the show live with our pals over at the Live Gab group. That's patreon.com/ComicLab. There is a level where you can join us at the live stream every week. There is a running commentary. I'm waving to the gang right now. And it's also archived every week. So if you have to miss the show for life, love, or learning, you can check out the archive. I don't know why I said love. That makes it sound like you've got other opportunities. You know what? Go with God. If you've got that, then skip the podcast. That's what I'm saying.
Do not hang around the live draw, for crying out loud.
Never pass up an opportunity for love, Brad.
Yes.
So anyway, that's over at patreon.com/ComicLab.
So Dave, to start out the show, I know that you wanted to talk about something that I'm really fascinated to hear more about, something called the Decoy Effect.
Yes, and this is something, we often bring things to the show where we sort of have an answer in mind or a fixed solution or something that we've tried and used for years, and so we want to share it with other people. And this was something that I was made aware of this weekend and am fascinated by, because I think there's potential real world applications for Kickstarter or Patreon or even our book pricing at shows and stuff. And I don't know what it is. So I wanted to ask you what you thought it was. And it's called the Decoy Effect. And here's the basic idea is that let's say there's McDonald's pricing. And if they have 3 cups versus 2 cups, small, medium, large, or just small and large, right? By introducing a decoy medium at a price point that no one would really like, right? Mm-hmm. Not only do people not choose the decoy effect, but because of the existence of the decoy at the shitty price in the middle, you get more people willingly choosing to go to the higher tier price when a decoy is in effect. So here's a real world example of this. The Economist magazine, which I love, I subscribe to, even though it's kind of a ridiculous magazine, but it had 3 price points, right? It had $60 for online only, $125 for print and online only, and then they introduced a decoy option of just print, but at the same price of $125 that you could get print and online, right? Oh. It's obviously a decoy. No one would choose it. And in fact, no one did choose it. It was at 0%. No one willingly said, I just want print, when they could have said, yeah, print and online for the same price. I'll just get that one, right? But what happens psychologically, though, is as soon as The Economist introduced that decoy option of just print at the same price that print and online, they had a doubling of the people choose print and online. So from the A/B testing of it, it's not just that it made people feel better about their choices. You actually had more people choosing the $125 price point because there was this bad, crappily priced decoy effect option in the middle. And so I was fascinated by this because I feel like, I don't know. I feel like there's some possibilities here for our Kickstarter pricing or our Patreon or our book pricing. And I wanted to ask you first what you thought of this, and then secondly, if you can think of any fun ways we could use this without seeming skeevy to our readers.
Okay, I'm starting to understand what you're talking about here, especially, okay, so let's say you've got a restaurant and you've got a small, medium, and large. The small, let's say you make it 25 cents.
Yes.
The medium, you make it 65 cents. And
Yes.
the large, you could make, well, you wouldn't want to do what the Economist did because that'd be confusing. But let's say the large is 75 cents.
Yeah, just a smidge above. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you basically say is and you hear people in sales, retail sales do this all the time. For another dime, you can have a large. For just 10 cents more, you can have a large. Because let's face it, nobody wants the small unless they're buying for a small child. So you immediately hop to the medium.
Right.
And then for just a little bit more, you get the large. Right.
Right.
So I can see how the decoy pricing works. And it would be interesting to see if you weren't dealing with a quantity like a drink, if you could actually reproduce the actual Economist choice of having that decoy at the same exact price point,
right?
It would be fascinating to see if that could actually work out.
Well, it's funny because you picked, I think, a really good option, because I think a perfect example of decoy pricing is McDonald's supersized options. Because when they introduced those in the 90s or the early 2000s, you still had large. Large was still an option.
Right.
But why the hell would you choose large when 10 cents more you could get a supersize, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like that must have been a version of the decoy effect where it's like, look, the cost per unit for McDonald's is 1/100th of a penny to produce this carbonated drink, right? It's like it's at the volumes that they're dealing at, it's next to nothing. And so if they can upsell you for a slightly larger cup, which also cost them pennies on the dollar, and then you've now upside, like that has to be a version of the decoy effect of this large that basically meaningless, because why wouldn't you pay 10 cents more to get a supersized drink, you know?
I'm going to argue that decoy pricing is built into the approach that you and I typically advocate for Patreon. And I'll tell you what I mean. We usually talk to people about the $2, $5, and $10 Patreon tier, at least to start out with.
Yeah.
$2, $5, and $10. $2, we call that the support tier, right? That's where you're not giving away any particular physical rewards, nothing important, nothing with a high type of demand. Basically at $2, it's support this artist and maybe Discord server and early access, but nothing that has real value. Okay. Those things have value, but you understand nothing like an actual exclusive reward.
Right.
Then at the $5 level, we talk about people having their mid-interest rewards, and then $10 level, the high-interest rewards. And of course, then you can obviously build up from there, but we usually recommend people start with the 2, 5, and 10. That $2 is, in a way, a decoy price. Because yes, you can just come in and enter at the support tier, but for just $3 more, in fact, this might even be, we were talking about the interest, or not the interest rate, but inflation last week. This might be a good excuse to even, we were saying, well, maybe we'll bump that 2 to a 3 at some point. Getting that 3 closer to a 5 brings the decoy effect a little bit closer into focus, where you say, yeah, I could jump into this Patreon at $3. $3 isn't much. I could justify that. And then you see for just $2 more, you can get a mid-interest reward there at the $5 level. I'm going to argue that decoy pricing is naturally built into the Patreon approach that we endorse.
You know, you might be right. We're definitely inching them up, but I feel like that's a different kind of upselling than what this specific decoy effect is. And here's the sort of ideal control group that I think we could replicate this Economist test, which was next time you're kickstarting an Evil Ink book, right? You're going to make the physical book. That's the whole point of the Kickstarter. But you also know that with a little extra work, a little extra elbow grease, you got an ebook, bada bing, bada boom, in seconds, right? And the ebook, the cost of distribution is nothing. So you're definitely going to offer the ebook. You're definitely going to offer the book. But would it be an interesting test to have a decoy effect level that says you can get the ebook for 10, you can get the book for 20, or you can get the book and the ebook for 20, and just see what happens? Now, granted, the only control group that would work in that scenario is Americans, because the price would have to be fixed for shipping. If you, as soon as you introduce international shipping, you'll be like, people will go, well, I want the ebook because I'm not paying $20 to ship to Australia.
Right.
But, so your control group would essentially be Americans, but would that be an interesting and worthwhile test to run on our next Kickstarters? That sort of decoy effect of ebook, book, and then book and ebook?
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
With the same price. And I think there's something interesting about that idea of it being the same price. So that, because I a little bit feel like the psychology of that decoy effect kicks in especially hard when the price is absolutely the same. And so your brain goes, well, who would pick that middle option? I'd be dumb not to do that bigger option. And so people jump up even from the ebook level, So
basically what you're doing at that point is bringing all of those people who come in at the very lowest tier of your Kickstarter, and you're talking a bunch of them into bumping up into that higher tier.
Right.
Because we know that from experience. When we do a Kickstarter, a big chunk of our backers are people who are choosing that ebook only reward, right? That's a huge chunk. So if you can get a bunch of those to bump up to the physical book, that's going to have a significant impact on your Kickstarter. Because
I feel like the psychology of the decoy effect is almost the reverse. It's like the consumer version of leaving money on the table. It's like they knew going in they were going to back Brad Geiger's ebook, right? But then they get to your Kickstarter and they see that your ebook is $10, your book is $20, but your book and ebook are $20, right? And so a part of them on the consumer side is like, am I kind of leaving money on the table by not getting the bigger one? I would be getting a book and an ebook for $20 like that. I feel like, wow, I feel like I'm not being a savvy consumer if I'm not going to, you know what I mean? I feel like that's the psychology that jumps people up. Yeah. And I kind of want to test it. I don't know, but it's also like, I don't want to be this Machiavellian cartoonist, but I kind of want to test out the decoy effect.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the only thing I have a little bit of aversion to is having two Kickstarter tiers at the same price, because I'm worried about the confusion. Sure. But at that point, as long as you didn't, continue that effect all the way down, I think I would love to see an experiment like that to see what would happen. I mean, it would be interesting. The problem for us, unlike The Economist, is there's no way to A/B test it, though. You know what I mean? There's no way to know if it ever worked or if we just aggravated people. Because also, not that I was going to say our readers are smarter than average people, but The Economist subscribers are actually pretty smart people. That's world leaders and business leaders. And yet they still fall for it, which is fascinating to me, by the way, that it's a human universal that even these, like I've got my third PhD and I'm still falling for the decoy effect. Right. But anyway, to get back to the point, there's no way for us to A/B test it, so we would never know if it worked. If you know what I mean, because we've all had Kickstarters that we thought were virtually identical. One makes $10,000 more. What was the difference? Who knows? And so because there's no good way for us to scientifically test one thing against another to see which way worked. It's a bummer to never know if our decoy effect worked in our Kickstarter. The only way you could decoy test it, and I'm not advocating this because I don't like this in general, but you do see some people who will do a campaign on Kickstarter and Indiegogo at the same time. And it's not quite scientific, but it would be something that would both be taking place at the same time. You'd inch closer to being able to A/B test it that way. And the only way you would know, obviously the Indiegogo would make less money, but the only way you would know would be the dollar amount per backer, So if you have 1,000 backers and your Kickstarter was $10,000, you could have $1 per backer. Anyway, so I mainly wanted to introduce this to you and to me and to our listenership because it's just an interesting reminder. It's the same kind of thing of the M&M effect that, humans eat more M&Ms because they're different colors, that if they were the same type of traditional brown, black chocolate, you would eat less M&Ms. It always boggles my mind that the brain wants more because it's this weird lizard brain hunter-gatherer thing of I've got to have variety in my diet. I've got to eat. And so we're eating the same chocolate, but just colored differently. It's good to be aware of these psychological tricks. Also, if nothing else, as a consumer, now you're aware of it, that their pricing can happen like this and to see it. And by the way, apparently, even when you're aware that the decoy effect is being used on you, it still is really hard to fight it. Like there's still a part of you like, but it is a good savvy consumer to buy the higher item thing. And like
That's how good it works, apparently.
Yeah. And to do that, you literally have to have it at the same price point. Or at a negligible, like $20.01. I could see doing that. You to really have the true effect of the decoy effect, you really have to have it at that same price point. That's fascinating.
It's bonkers how the brain fails to work sometimes in terms of getting us to the right option. However, it is interesting that if it's one more tool in the toolbox to get people to realize the value of your book and ebook collection, that's interesting, I guess. But is it immoral? I don't know. I don't think so. You're just basically giving them a different way to look at it. I don't know. More than anything else, I've just found it fascinating that it works, basically.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's wonderful. I'm glad you brought that up. Well, listen, I'm sure as the days go on, we're going to have lots of suggestions from our ComicLab listeners on how they think that we can apply the decoy effect.
And if you're in the Discord server, by all means, jump in on where, how, and when you think a cartoonist could effectively and morally use the decoy effect with their readership.
We're going to throw morals in there, and we're going to throw morals.
Yeah, I mean, we like to still be good people. I don't want to use it. I don't. It's basically a hack on the brain, and it's interesting to see how we could use it in a good way, basically.
Well, here's another topic I'm going to pitch for today's show that I hopefully has using our powers for good. This absolutely recently came up on the ComicLab Discord server. It was one of the reasons that I think that the community we're building on the Discord server around our ComicLab listeners as part of a Patreon reward really has value because this person had a real problem and he brought it to the ComicLab Discord and got some great advice.
Yeah, I thought it was really good advice from the community.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring this up just because it was worth talking about. This was a writer, and he had written a script for a graphic novel and hired an artist, but the artist took the money offered up front, which was half the total rate, and then bailed without delivering. So he hired a second artist, put less money down this time, but the same thing happened. The artist took the money and then disappeared. So this writer comes in and says, "Hey, I need some help. This keeps happening to me." And he goes, "Am I just looking in the wrong places?" Because I guess he had found these artists on Reddit and Facebook. And he goes, "Am I just looking in bad places?" And immediately, of course, the Discord conversation immediately is turned to what was the contract? And we found out, there was no contract. Well, that was the first thing that they said. You need to have a contract.
Yep.
And that was, by the way, that was good advice that he got there. And then as they were talking in a very friendly way, they started to say, well, listen, what about the page rates? What were you offering for the page rates? And I'm not going to share the number because it's kind of inconsequential, but the group determined, well, those page rates are a little bit low for the amount of work being required.
Right.
At which point the writer defended his decision. And he said, listen, and this is, by the way, perfectly reasonable. This guy says, this is the page rate that the artist quoted me. Are you saying that I should have talked the artist into a higher rate? And there was a few people who insisted that that was exactly what he should have done.
Yeah.
Including one person that had some pretty impressive publishing credits under their belt. He dug in his heels. He says, well, listen, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. I don't think that I should have talked that other person into a higher rate. And that's when I came in and I said, actually, I'm going to share a story with you. And I'm going to share that story right now. I said, there are times in a negotiation where you want to talk your opponent, quote unquote, into a higher rate. You want to talk the other guy into getting paid more. And that's because there's different types of negotiations. One type, and we can talk about that a little bit more, but as you're going to hear this story, I want you to remember this was a different type of negotiation than maybe your typical negotiation. So the story starts here. When I was originally doing black and white comics, I said on the Web Comics Weekly podcast I said, hey, I'd love to be doing color, but I don't have the time and I don't have the skills to do color well.
Right.
And that's when Ed Rysowski got in touch with me, my first colorist, and said, hey, I'd be willing to do it for free. And the negotiation from that moment had started. Okay. He was offering to do it for free. And I said, listen, we can't do that. I can't do that. You got to get paid something. And we negotiated a very fair rate. And also we negotiated in the first couple of months, pay raises, like 6 months at a time, pay raises, so that because the rate that we started out with was reasonable. But as we determined that Ed was able to stick with it, that I was able to continue to stick with it and get Ed the materials that he needed to work in time. In other words, this had to be a two-way street. And we set up scheduled pay raises where we would say, if we get to 6 months and there's no problems, we'll bump the rate up to this. And then another 6 months, we'll bump the rate up to that until finally. And also I said, the other part of this is, as we're seeing that the color strip brings in more page views and therefore more advertising. This was in an advertising model. As that happens, I'll have the money to pay more. So that's exactly what we're going to do.
Right.
I talked my negotiating opponent, quote unquote, into getting paid more. And I'll tell you why I did that and why you should consider doing it, because it was a different type of negotiation. I'm going to full stop. This was a creative collaborator negotiation. This was not a business negotiation in the purest sense, in which if you are negotiating with a landlord for a studio lease, then you go in and you absolutely negotiate like a toughie, right? If you're negotiating with the cable company for internet and you find yourself in a negotiation there, you go in and you are a hard-nosed competitor. But if you're negotiating a contract with someone who you expect to be your creative collaborator, you want that person to be in it for the long haul. Yep. And if that's the case, you need to make sure that they are getting properly rewarded. This guy tried it the other way, and the artist bailed on him both times. I'm going to argue that if you would actually talk them into a higher pay rate and had a little bit of a reward at the end of every project, right? So that this person said, listen, drawing comics is a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be. I'm going to, but I'm going to stick with it because we've got this reward back there. Right. I'm going to argue that they might have had a little bit better experience. You can never tell for sure, but I will tell you this, in a certain type of negotiation where you are trying to bring a creative collaborator on board, it's to your best interest to make sure that that person has full investment, full involvement in that. And sometimes that means talking the other person into getting paid more.
Yeah, it's funny. This show is turning out to be a question of morals in financing, because I have done the same thing, Brad, actually. And Brad has had firsthand experience with this, because I, in the last, 7 or 8 years, maybe 9 years, have hired outside writers and artists to do drive stories. And like Brad said, the very first thing that I did was I hired a lawyer who specialized in work for hire contracts to put up I don't know, Brad, you probably remember, it was like a 2-page, 3-page work for hire contract. Just laid out the terms and the times and the payment schedules and the deliverables and the expectations and what would happen if things went wrong. And it's a template, and I can modify it slightly with this or that artist to put in their name, their address, all that sort of thing. But it's ready to go. So that was step number one. I agree with Brad that a contract is important, because then it's not just I'll do it for $100. It's a little bit more solidified. And then the second thing, like Brad, I have actually found that it is worthwhile to, in the cases where people are underselling their own value, for me to take the moment and say, no, listen, you need to be charging more. Even if you're not going to charge more, I'm going to pay you more, because this is worth it for me to get your best effort. And it's worth it for you to step away from all your existing work, because you're an established cartoonist. And I'm asking you to step away from your titles to work on my stuff. So I'm going to pay you more than you're even asking for to get the best out of you in this moment.
And as a result, you got people who are willing to be in it for the long haul. Like Ed was with me. I forget. Gosh, he started with me from 2008 through 2015. All right. When Ed was ready to move on in 2015, he gave me lots of notice. He was willing to help bring the new person aboard and do any training that they needed. We left in perfectly good stead. We left in perfectly friendly terms. And that's when, of course, Alex Heberling joined me. And Alex has been with me ever since.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, I've been into a situation where I could have had that coloring done much less expensive in both cases. But I realized at the very outset that it's in my best interest to make sure that that person's well taken care of, because I've only had to go through 2 colorist changes, right? And I can't put a price on Alex in particular. Well, Ed and Alex both. I don't want to single one out over the other, but since I'm working with Alex currently, I'll just say this. I don't have to send Alex a single note when I send her a page to do a Viva Link. She knows all the characters. She knows where all the people are supposed to be. She knows what people are supposed to be colored like. And if there is none, she knows that then that becomes her decision, because I want her to have that kind of investment. You know, if a new character comes up, she decides. Unless I got something absolutely in mind, she's got full reign. Do you know what kind of joy that is to have somebody in a collaboration that you don't have to watch every little thing? You just say, here, take it, do it. I know it's going to be great. I can't wait to see it.
I'm the same way, because with Beth, my colorist, more often than not, I'm infinitely happier that she's doing it than I am, because I know it in many respects, in most respects, it's in better hands than if I were doing it. And so, I completely agree with you. I mean, really, Brad, this comes down to treat others the way you want to be treated. And if you treat people with kindness, with respect for their abilities, with consideration for their deadlines and for their time, with good humor, and then with appropriate remuneration, you get, I think, more often than not, you get their best work out of them, and you get good word of mouth that spreads to other artists, other colorists, other people that you're going to hire. That's no small thing in this world. And then you also get them staying longer. You know, they're willing to do it again. There's a reason why I've had people come back and do Tales of the Drive stories again, because they're like, the pay was great, it was fun to do, the editorial was not tricky, the deadlines were super manageable, and it was fun to do. So, like, great, that's what you want. That's what you want.
Yeah. And so here's our advice if you're in that similar situation. A, make sure you've got a contract. B, it still is a smart idea, especially while you're feeling your way with a new person. I would continue to recommend that whole deal where you pay a little bit up front and then the rest of it upon completion. I think that's still fair, and I think that's still reasonable. And then number 3, make sure as you're negotiating that price that that other person is getting a fair price, a fair remuneration for what they're contributing. Yeah,
and honestly, it will help you sleep at night, because you're not a corporation; you're another artist, and we want to build up a whole field of helping and supporting one another. And so if the ecosystem is, hey, I'm not actively trying to screw you, I'm trying to find a price that you can live off of, that I can live off of, that we can make cool art together, it's just a better, healthier, happier environment for all of us as artists together.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Dave, we've got a question from ComicLab listener Kai, who says this: Lately, I've been rereading Alison Bechtel and Ali Brosh's work, and it has gotten me thinking about comic-type works that rely heavily on prose. In the case of Bechtel's autobiographical work, she relies heavily on narration boxes to explain historical, literary, psychological, etc. contexts, frequently using verbose academic language. Meanwhile, Brosh's work consists of prose-style paragraphs interspersed with comic panels, and she uses this juxtaposition to heighten the comedy of her stories. I'm a big fan of both of these cartoonists and how they use language. However, I don't really see this style of comics around, and this use of prose style seems to run contrary to most comics advice I've heard. My question to you is this. Do you think there is a place in the independent comics landscape for this hybrid of comics and prose to gain traction? Or do you think Bechtel and Brosh's works are exceptions to the rule? In which ways would this kind of creator approach the business of indie comics differently from the others? As always, thanks for your great advice and your patience with my wordiness. All right, so we've got two questions there. Could a comic that relies heavily on prose, could it be successful? And if so, how would they approach the business of indie comics differently?
This is a question I don't think, Brad, in 5 years we've ever tackled before. So this will be an interesting one. So first of all, self-evidentially, I think that yes, it can work because it has worked. Alison Bechtel and Ali Brosh have both built wonderful careers for themselves. Yeah. Bechtel, in her case, has had her work adapted into other platforms, other mediums. It's been acclaimed and given prizes in numerous outlets. And I believe, just from an outsider looking in, financially, it's probably going just fine for her between Fun Home, Dykes Watch Out For, and all the other titles that she's worked on. Mm-hmm. And so I think just on basis alone of how it looks, I think that career is obviously can work. And yes, the style can work. The question is, how would you do it in an independent style, in a web-based way? And this is trickier because so much of what we do is making things bite-sized and easily consumable, and certain pages of comics like that become trickier to communicate in a digital format, I would think, Brad. Mm-hmm. The closest I could come to for someone who's very wordy but bite-sized would be like Jules Pfeiffer from The Village Voice, if you remember, Brad. Yeah. His very wordy, very minimalist art comics, but we're still comics, still sequential. Mm-hmm. That would be, I would think, the closest thing for how you would do it independently online. But there's no reason you couldn't do long form and just modify all the tips and tricks that Brad and I have given you in terms of frequent, consistent, and substantial with every update. Mm-hmm. And yet it's heavily on the prose. So is it doable? Yes. Does it require a little bit more fancy footwork? Yes. But I think both are possible.
Well, I want to go backwards just for a second and go back to, could it be successful? And that is, I want you to understand something, because we get this disconnect all the time. And I think it's really important to bring the focus back into where it should be. As people who are elbows deep in this kind of comics landscape, we're always very, very cognizant of format, right? So many of our questions come in asking if there's special rules for long form. And we keep saying there's no special rules for long form. Are there special rules for short form? There are no special. Format really doesn't matter if the story is good. If you're telling a good story and you're telling it well, it doesn't matter what format you're using. That's what the real point here is. It doesn't matter that they're using more words than you would find recommended in a How to Draw Comics book, because their stories were good and they were telling them well. So the format doesn't matter. It comes back to this all the time. Again, there's no, and by the way, no special rules goes right on through into the business aspect. There's no special rules for this either. As if you were trying to say, okay, I'm going to do a similar thing. And let's say that you had successfully achieved, that this was a good story, and that you were telling it well. Okay, let's say that you had achieved that. In other words, that falls under do a good comic. Let's say you have achieved that. Now it goes right back into no special rules. You would approach that as an independent comics artist, as a web cartoonist. You would approach that using all of the things that Dave and I suggest from day one of ComicLab, all those things that we talk about. Yes, you would want to have your own website. Absolutely. You would want to share that on social media in a way that you could read it easily on social media. However you choose to solve that problem. Yes. Would you want to put it on Webtoons? Absolutely. You'd want to mirror that on Webtoons and Tapasket if you thought that was a good fit for your comic. All of those things that we say, yes, you'd want to, all those things we say since episode 1, you'd want to build your audience online before you try to take them to Patreon. Yes, you'd want to make sure that you're ready to go with a project before you pull the trigger on a Kickstarter. Yes, all of those things that we've been saying for 230 some episodes, and we're going to say for 200 and some episodes more and beyond, apply. The format doesn't matter. What matters is you're doing a good story and you're telling it well, and then you go out there and you do these things. And by the way, be prepared to adapt, because everything that I just talked about is going to be slowly modifying over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So all of those things that I said is only a starting point. The rest of it is up to you to stay on top of, keep your eyes open, and be ready to adapt.
For the most part, I agree with you, but I want to lovingly disagree a little bit, which is that you were like, there's no special rules. There's nothing unique here. I get the spirit of what you're saying, because 99% of what we do in terms of offering advice for business and the sharing of comics and the way you build an audience and the way you create and then consistently create, all of that is true. Absolutely. But I do think that this specific prose heavy long narrative style of comics is more akin to trying to share a novel page by page. And so I do think there's certain specific, unique rules that will kick in, because we always say, you want to do frequent, consistent, and substantial in your updates. And sometimes with super long form, that's almost like novella or novel length works. Sometimes to get to substantive, you're going to have to share more than 1 page, 2 page, 3 page, 4 page, 5 pages in a chunk, because it won't be substantive enough. You know what I mean? You don't think so? You're
making the classic mistake that a lot of people make, and that is that you think that the only thing you have to share is the comic. That's a classic mistake. When we talk about the 4 C's of social media, we've talked about this.
I'm saying, no, pause. I get what you're about to say, but when I'm saying, when you do actually share the comic, sometimes in novel writing, you've done this with your own prose. It's not satisfying to just to share the 5 or 6 paragraphs of a page, because nothing substantive happens on that page. The buildup is taking 4, 5, 6 pages in prose writing to get to the payoff of what's going on with his character. Why is Holden Caulfield so worried about getting to a body through the rye? All that sort of stuff. It takes a while to build that up. It's not an immediate payoff in one page. Sometimes you have to take a moment and share bigger chunks of that when you're doing prose type writing, because it's not satisfying, is what I'm getting at. It's the equivalent of you saying that last week with the one panel of like, hey guys, we having coffee in the office, and then waiting a day and sharing the next panel. Sometimes in more prose like longer form writing, it's unsatisfying to just share it page by page, because nothing of true value has happened in prose writing in that one page,
Nope. I totally, you have an absolute perfect point there. And I agree 100%. At which point my one bit of advice there, and I've shared it on the show before, is if you're in a situation like that, look to the romance writers, because the romance writers have gotten social media down pat. And you can see on TikTok, Instagram, a lot of different places, the way that they are sharing their stuff, the way that they're promoting their stuff. Man, I learned so much by following romance writers. And if you've got a heavy prose aspect to this, then I would say that you might want to take a look at what they're doing and see how you can creatively adapt that to what you're doing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I often go back to, I don't know why he always pops into my mind, but Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a hugely imperfect person, but just talking about the business model of Sherlock Holmes, he wrote long form with two things in mind. Somewhat short formish releases that were frequently updating that would then be bundled together and sold as one continuous long form story, right? Yeah. So he was sharing Sherlock Holmes in this frequently updated newspaper, which is a bonkers way to think about it, but that's how he was writing it. Like, oh no, will Holmes go find the Hound of the Baskerville? Tune in next time is basically what was going on, you know? And then a year or so later, they would collect it in a London publisher and put it out in book form. And I think a little bit, that's the way you just have to think of it as a long form prose cartoonist, is that you're writing for the book. That's the satisfying thing. Let's all be honest about this. Yeah. The satisfying read of long form prose comic narrative is book. Yet you want to try to figure out ways that it can be really satisfyingly released online, if that's what you're trying to say when you say indie, released online in a satisfying way. So you got to figure out a way to chunkify it. Like, I will release this chunk, then I will release this chunk. And for some people, that's chapters, although I don't recommend that. For some people, it's satisfying chunks within the chapters. That I would more recommend that. And sometimes it's like multiple pages that could be tied together thematically to have a meaningful moment at the end of it. That I would recommend. Yeah. But it's going to be a little bit more substantive than your average Evil Link page or your average Drive page. It's going to be a little longer, a little bit bigger in the tooth, because that's just the way prose works. It just takes a little bit longer to build up a head of steam.
Absolutely. And I think that I think it can be done. I absolutely think it can be done.
I think it can be done too. Yeah. Can you think of anyone that's doing it well, Brad, just out of curiosity, as a someone to point to?
Well, somebody online? No, I got to be honest with you. That is what you're describing there is not so much my jam. So I can't say that I know of any indies that are doing that. I took a quick peek at the live stream chat, and somebody has mentioned Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which is another good example from that kind of approach to comics. But no, I can't mention anyone off the top of my head. Can you?
Yeah, the only one that's I find that's having big success at the moment, but it's not necessarily prose comic. It's not necessarily different than what you or I are doing, is Lore Olympus. But that's not actually a text-heavy comic when you look at it. It's beautifully drawn. It's not what I think this person is asking about in terms of heavy narrative, heavy prose, almost novella, novel type writing. But so I think to get to it is to summarize what Brad and I are both saying, even though we are taking slightly different tacks on it, most of our rules and suggestions that we have given over the last couple of years about writing comics, sharing comics, distributing comics, printing comics, making a living from comics, most of that will, I think Brad and I would both agree, would translate perfectly for narrative and prose comics. I think even though we slightly disagree, we would still both say it is absolutely doable. And it's a little bit of fancy footwork, but it's all about finding ways to satisfyingly release it in an update schedule that makes it work for your production and for your readers' enjoyment, that can then also be bound in book form. And then I think you're off to the races.
Absolutely. So Dave, I've got another question from one of our $5 level Patreon backers. And this one's interesting. It says, I work full-time in game art, and I have comics as side gigs in traditional publishing and indie that earn me just above $100,000 a year in Australia. I thought I was doing pretty well for myself until I hear about my friends earning a lot more, working just as a full-time corporate job. How do I consolidate those feelings that I'm working twice as hard for a lot less money than my friends? How can I be content with my achievements? Dave, this person's corporate friends are making more money by a significant lot, and they're not working their fingers to a bone doing it. So what's the use? What do we tell this person?
This is a highly subjective answer, but I think it's still universal, which is you have to isolate for you what brings you value, what brings you joy, what brings you happiness and contentment in your life's work. I can only speak for myself here that if I stopped what I was doing now and took up friends' offers to go work in advertising, I could make 2 or 3 times what I'm making right now as a cartoonist. If I stopped what I was doing right now and took up my wife's offer to go work in television writing, I could be making 10 to 100 times what I'm making right now as a cartoonist. if I took up the worst nightmare of my life and went and became a lawyer or an accountant or so, like I could be making hundreds an hour as a chargeable billable rate. But I don't want to do that. I want to be a cartoonist. I've always wanted to be a cartoonist. To me, it's such a joy-filled life to write and share what I want to write and share with no editor or publisher telling me what to do, and directly interacting with people on a level that I can set and I can control, so that because I'm both an extrovert and an introvert, I can limit or expand how much I want to offer myself to the public. And again, I do it on my timeline, under my terms, under my conditions, and I'm creating what I want. And when I pass from this world, I will have put out what I truly wanted to do for decades at a time, not what some middle manager asked me to do for a quarterly report.
Yes.
And I will have been happy for it, even though I made less money. Brad, what are your thoughts on this?
I think the first thing that anyone has to do at any stage of their life, where they're just starting out and they've been doing this for a while, or whether they've been doing this for a long time, because the answer to this next question is going to change during all of those times. But you've got to ask yourself one thing: what does success look like for me? And that's a really important question, because success for Dave Kellett looks like one thing. Success for Brad Guigar looks like one thing. Success for Jim Davis looks like one thing, right? And success is not a one size fits all kind of thing. Everybody's going to have a different determination of what success looks like for them.
Yes.
And it's amazing how often, especially like teaching at University of the Arts, I catch people off guard with this all the time, because I'll ask them just point blank, what is success for you? What does success look like? Like in the next year, what does success look like? In the next 5 years, what does success look like? 10 years. It's the first time they've ever thought of it. They thought it was a given. Well, it means that I'm rich and I've got a movie under my belt. Well, how likely is that in the next year? How likely is that in 5 years? And by the way, how much money is rich? And what kind of movie? And is it your movie, or is it a movie that you contributed to? You'd be amazed how seldom people have given any thought to what success actually looks like. And the problem with that is, if you're trying to find success, is that it's impossible to find something if you don't know what it looks like. You're searching for something that you don't know what it looks like. You haven't sat down and asked yourself, what does success look like? And what's it going to look like 5 years later and 10 years later? I think that's what you need to do.
And also, what are the downsides of having achieved that success, Brad, if I can piggyback on you? Yeah. Like, a lot of people are like, no, I want to be able to sell that movie, or I want to be able to do this or that. Well, what are the downsides of that? And is that also what you're comfortable and happy as subscribing to as success for you? Right. And so, I like that idea that you can't truly chase after it until you have visualized it in its completeness. And that doesn't mean you have to, by the way, it also doesnting mean you have to be locked into it forever. Brad and my ideal of what is success for us has changed over the last 20 years.
Very much so.
I thought, just putting all the cards on the table, I thought in my 20s what I wanted was a version of Jim Davis or Schultz or Penny Arcade, having 20 employees in a big studio. And I was over there drawing or penciling or doing whatever it was. And then other people were helping me finish the work and getting it out there, like a manga studio maybe, the mangaka system of like 10 assistants. And then I came to realize my personality doesn't actually want that many employees. I don't want a lot of employees. I'm enough of a self-described non-manager, non-boss, that I don't know that I would be good at or happy with a lot of employees. So I don't know that that's the right success for me. I've since realized the way I have it now, with Beth and I happily producing comics at our own pace and cranking them out and enjoying it and loving the interaction that we've set with readers, that's a lovely life. Yeah. So right now, thankfully, I have sort of met my own definition of success. And I don't know that I have a further definition at the moment of what I would want to improve upon, what I would want to expand upon. Do you, Brad, just out of curiosity?
No, but I guarantee it's going to happen for both of us. I guarantee it's going to, because
yes, it will happen again.
Yeah. And that's the other thing that you said that I just want to go back and underline is that at different times, you're going to have to reassess success. Sometimes it's going to mean because either the world changed or you changed. And now that version of success doesn't fit quite so much. Like Dave and I always talked about, we both wanted to be newspaper cartoonists, right? And then the world, it's the publishing platform, it changed in terms of print publishing in daily newspapers. So our version of success had to change. It's going to change for us again as we reach retirement age. Dave, I know just around the corner, just a few more birthdays, you're going to be starting to think about that very in very real terms as you get your AARP card out and think what's retirement going to look like for me?
Well, I know you're taking a shot, but yes, I'm actually going to take this in a loving way because you're not wrong. Yeah. Like there are also going to be slightly external life events that are going to cause you to change your definition of success. Mm-hmm. Like when I had kids, I will be honest, my wife's job was more labor intensive on an hourly basis. And so I sort of became the stay-at-home dad in a way, in the sense that my studio was right here. I was happy to do it. It just meant I downgraded certain output. And that's partially why I brought on an assistant, because I just couldn't keep up the working till 2 a.m., cranking it all out by myself, putting out 2 books a year by myself. It just wasn't working, So I had to bring in an assistant and say, I'm basically paying them to be a mini me so that I can spend more time with my kids. And that to me was a good value proposition. But when my kids leave the house in the years ahead, I can see me living a very different life with a very different definition of success than I had while I had kids, because I was also willing to take on more work to bring in more income so that they lived a more comfortable life and had enough for healthcare or this or that, or, whatever it was. Yeah. You do things because the peace of mind gives you a sense of happiness and success, even though that's not a traditional definition of success. Having a roof over your head, having a car paid for, having healthcare, having all this sort of that, all that stuff helps lean towards you, a sense of happy definition of success. And then when they leave the house, maybe it changes around a little bit. So yes, I can, although you were joking about reaching an AARP age, I actually can see my definition of success changing again.
And that's okay. That's normal and natural, and it's going to happen. But until then, really, what this person is dealing with is kind of grass is greener on the other side of the fence kind of syndrome. Yes. What they need to do is stop being so concerned about the version of success that their friends are pursuing, and ask themselves, would that version of success be a good fit for them? Would that suit fit them? Well, maybe not. And if that's the case, then yes, your version of success might mean less money and more work, but it's your version of success. And you're not going to be truly happy with somebody else's version of success.
Yeah, and there's also workarounds. Like maybe what you're looking at when your grass is greener is like, I'd really like a down payment on a condo or on a small 1-bedroom house so we can get started and get our foot planted into the housing market. And so maybe what you want to do is do part-time or freelance or corporate work for a couple of years, just so you can get that peace of mind from it. So what I'm saying is your current definition of who you are and what you do doesn't have to be fixed in stone. If you want to achieve certain things of like, we got to pay off this car, we got to pay off our college debt, or we got to get our first house, whatever it is, you can be a little maneuverable for a couple of years and see how that goes for you.
Absolutely. So Dave, we've got one more question to round out the show. I think this is going to be one that we can handle pretty easily. And it comes in from a Patreon backer who goes by the moniker Eye Whiskers. And it says this: hey, Dave and Brad, quick question. Should I personally message and thank all new patrons? I'd like them to stick around for a while and feel appreciated, but I can't quite afford Bonjoro at the moment. So Dave, what advice do we have? The person is like, should I be messaging new Patreon backers?
This is a sweet question because it forgets that both Patreon and basic email have messaging systems that work just fine. You don't need to go. It's kind of like when a young kid at a convention comes up and asks me what supplies they need to buy to be a cartoonist. I'm always like, you know what? A pencil, paper, you got that? You're off to the races. Good to go. You're now a cartoonist. You have here, I give you the official dispensation. You are now an official cartoonist. You don't need some official T-square or some, official inkwell. And so it's a little bit like that. Bonjoro, for those that aren't familiar, is a service that Brad and I and some other people use where when you sign up to Patreon or sign up to buy a book or buy an original art, it sends a notification to Brad or my phone and says, hey, Skippy Boppy just joined Patreon. By the way, Skippy Boppy, a real name, Brad. I didn't just come up with that. That's someone's official name. Yeah. Skippy Boppy's joined your Patreon. Say thank you. And what I will do is I'll take my phone with the app, turn around, record a quick message to Skippy, and boop, I send it. And it's a nice personalized 30-second video that's just to them to say thank you for coming on board. But it's a paid service. You do not have to have it. No. Patreon has a built-in messaging service that can be automated, by the way, to thank them when they've joined. You can then follow it up with a personalized message as well, by email, by all sorts of ways. And I think that sort of lower tech version is the way to go in this case.
It doesn't matter how you do it. It matters that you do it, because you do need to reach out to that person, no matter how you do it. Doesn't have to be on Bonjoro, but you do need to reach out, because you are establishing a personal connection. That's part of what's going on here in Patreon. You're bringing those people into your community. So it's important that you, as the host of that community, are welcoming them and saying, hey, this is so great that you're here now. I'm so happy. And making that kind of initial message is important. And by the way, if you feel like, oh, geez, I want to do something personal, don't forget there's lots of personal things that you can do just with a simple email. If you wanted to, if you've got like a Wacom or sitting right there, you could theoretically do a 20-second sketch, not anything big, just something real simple, something that you would doodle on the outside of an envelope, for example. You could do a 20-second sketch that mentions this person by name and bring that right into the email and send it. That would be just as personal as a video if you wanted to do something like that. And if you just said some very kind words to welcome this person, that's fine too. Doesn't matter how you do it. It just matters that you do it.
Yeah, I think Brad's got that nail hit squarely on the head there. I think it's the idea behind it. It's the spirit behind it. Yeah. And you don't need the belt and suspenders of Bonjoro to just say thank you. And I genuinely appreciate it. And it means the world to me. And welcome aboard. And here's all the fun things. And again, though, you can also automate it. Patreon has a way for you to have one permanently recorded video that gets sent out along with any sort of immediate ebooks or gifts that you're giving to new patrons, if you have that for the level that they've gotten. And so you can automate that so it's a set it and forget it. But again, like Brad said, the idea is that you do it, not how you do it. And so I think with that in mind, you're going to do great.
Yeah. And you know what? Here's another thing. And I got to tell you, this falls under the category that it doesn't matter how you do it. It matters that we do it. It's time for us to do this. And that is to tell you that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
I like how that sort of sounds like it doesn't matter what nonsense we spouted. It matters that we did it. That's what we did.
That's right.
Did we give any good advice this week? I have no idea, but it matters that we did it.
But we ate up another hour. What do you want from us?
Look, we showed up. We sat down, we did it. Your hosts have been my friend Brad Guigar, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-.com.
And my good friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at the newly redesigned and beautiful drivecomic.com.
And point of correction, I said Brad's URL wrong after 4 years, so I'm going to say evil-comic.com.
Yes.
A little bit of a mispronunciation there on my part. You're going to want to check out evil-comic.com. And the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. David, this is not a review, but I got to share it with you. This one comes in from our listener named Kaishu, who says this. I'm a storyboard artist working in LA. I just listened to the new ComicLab episode and I heard your tap dancer story. As you remember, Dave, I've got a tap dancer moving in next door. Listen to this. Can you believe? I can't believe this. This is true. This is Kaishu talking. I went through the experience in 2019 when a tap dancer moved into the studio apartment above mine.
No.
Kaishu says it was bad. Not just the dancing. They stopped in general as if they were wearing work boots the entire day. It got really frustrating when we had to start working from home. They found another space, so it's no longer an issue. But hearing your story just put me on edge again. I got tap dancer PTSD. Although I do have to say, it's been a few weeks. I haven't heard all the joking aside, I haven't heard a sound over there. So so far I've got nothing to complain about.
So the only tap dancing they've done is tap dance into your heart. Is that what I'm hearing?
They right into my heart.
And on that note, I'm going to say Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/comiclab.
Serious question. Have you gotten your AARP card yet?
No.
They
no.
keep
when did they start sending them?
I've been getting them for years.
Oh, have you?
They keep sending me, here's your card. Of course, then you got to sign up and everything, but they keep sending me the card. And I'm like, I do not want this. I wonder if anyone has as much trouble trying to, they're not giving away the membership, but getting people to sign up, because once you sign up to AARP, you're admitting that you're retirement age. And nobody wants to do that. It's like, sign up for the Imminent Death Club.
Do you think that it's because, now listen, I'm not naming names, but do you think that AARP buys mailing lists of people to get white shoes at Costco? Because maybe that purchase is coming back to haunt you.
They might have the white shoes, white socks concession over there at Costco, and they're just going through there, picking up that mailing list.
Hey, we got a new guy to email. Brad Geiger just went to the early bird special at Chili's, so I think we found a new member.
Hey, is this AARP? Yeah, this is one of Dave's neighbors. Yeah, they're doing road work out on his street. He's been at the window for 23 minutes, hasn't moved. I think. Yeah, I'll give you his address. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, he's staring at he's at the supermarket aisle. He's holding 2 tomatoes in each hand going, I don't know. I think he's ready for his AARP membership.
Hello, AARP. Yeah, more news on Dave Kellett. There's somebody trying to parallel park out in front of his house. He's been out giving instructions.
Yeah, quick. Hi, AARP. Yeah, Dave Kellett. He's got relatives visiting, and he keeps insisting on giving them directions to the freeway. They've got GPS on their phones. He keeps going though on the directions. They keep telling him, Grandpa, we've got GPS. No, he's saying you want to take a left on Main Street, then go down 3 blocks to the old tree that's not there anymore.
Yeah, AARP. Yeah, Brad, I got some news on this, Brad Geiger, for you. He keeps going into restaurants now. Well, first of all, he's losing his voice. he's got old man voice, but then also he keeps saying things like this to his wife at restaurants. I can't finish all of that. Do you want to split it? I can't. It's too big. We got to split this next time. It's classic old man stuff.
Hello, AARP. Yeah, quick note on Brad Geiger updating on the restaurants. He sits down, he orders his meal. He already pre-asked for the doggy bags before he even starts his meal.